Do you have a hard stop?
No, not really. I mean, just when my family bugs me.
I know the feeling, man. I mean, if any of that happens while we're talking, I mean, I can edit it out. Unless it's really
Yep.
cute. If it's your kids or something, then I might leave it. All right, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. As always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. This week's episode is brought to you by Figma Academy from Dive Club. Now, we usually talk soft skills here in the show, but let's not forget that hard skills are just as important too, and mastering tools like Figma is crucial. Now, remember back in episode 49, Tommy Gioco mentioned knowledge debt and how you'll pay for learning with either your time or your money. Well, if you don't have time to learn it on your own, Figma Academy is your fast track to mastering Figma, and you'll be in good company too. Over 4,000 designers from industry leaders like Shopify, Microsoft, and Amazon have already taken the plunge. The course is hands-on, and you'll be part of a talented cohort of designers. Plus, they host live Q&A sessions every Thursday to clear up any questions you might have. You want your company to foot the bill? Well, lots of designers have done just that, and Figma Academy even offers an expense template to make it a breeze to get approval from your boss. And because you're all amazing listeners, I've teamed up with Figma Academy to offer you a $100 discount. Just head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Figma and use the promo code BeyondUX at checkout. This week's audiobook recommendation is The New Rules of Work, the Modern Playbook for Navigating Your Career by Alexandra Kavoulikos and Catherine Minshew. The New Rules of Work is a guide tailored for today's evolving job market, and the book provides insights on finding the right career, excelling in job searches, and effective workplace communication. It emphasizes the importance of things like personal branding, professional networking, and adapting to work's changing nature. And it underscores the continuous learning and flexibility and how important that is. It's practical and it's filled with real-life examples. It's a really great resource for career advancement, and it's really great for anybody new to UX design and all those seeking a career shift. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download The New Rules of Work completely free and help support the show in the process. So if you've been on your UX journey, your career journey for any amount of time now, could be 6 weeks, could be 6 months or 6 years, you've probably heard somebody telling you that you need to be strategic about your career and you need to actually plan. You've probably also heard this idea of tactical versus strategic UX work and where you should be focusing. So I've got my good buddy Dan Weiner here on the show. Dan posts a lot on LinkedIn, and a few of the things that he posts about, one of the big things is always about crafting your career and being very strategic about where you're going. So I am so excited to have Dan on the show. Dan has been designing professionally since 2007, and during that time, he's run a small agency, contracted for enterprise clients. He's been the founding designer at startups, and he's worked as data visualization designer and engineer. And during the last few years, he's led small design and research teams, and he's helped designers around the world grow their careers via his mentoring and content creation. Dan, welcome to Beyond UX Design, man. How's it going? It's great to have you.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's exciting to be here and awesome to hear the intro in real life. I've heard it so many times while walking my dog.
Yeah, right on, man. Yeah, I try to do it a little different every time instead of just recording one and then posting the same one. Adds a little bit of character, I think. I don't know. I try to change it up.
Yeah, it's great. I'm impressed how you can do it so smoothly.
Oh, a lot of practice.
Yeah, it shows.
You haven't heard the hundreds of other times that I totally screwed them up. So Dan, man, I'm so excited to have you on today because, as I said, you post on LinkedIn quite a bit, and a couple of things that strike me about your posts have always been about just how you're focused on helping junior designers think about their career. It's not just like leveling up and telling them exactly what they need to do. It's a lot of times, asking thought-provoking questions and, thinking about where they want to be and all that stuff. You've got some awesome templates that you've created to help people kind of brainstorm and think about that. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we do that, Dan, I know you're in Spain, but you certainly don't have a Spanish accent. So I want to hear, you've got an interesting story, I'm sure, making it to Spain. Tell us a little bit about you and all that stuff, and how'd you end up getting to the point we are today?
Yeah, sure. So I live in a small town in the south of Spain called Tarifa. It's where the Atlantic and the Mediterranean meet, in the southern tip of Spain,
Oh, wow.
very, very close to Morocco. I can see Morocco out my window from my office. It's about 12 kilometers across the Straits of Gibraltar. And so design is a big part of how I can live here. Originally, I came here to teach windsurfing. So
Oh, wow.
I dropped out of high school to travel the world teaching windsurfing. It was kind of my sort of alternative to what I saw at the time as like a conveyor belt into an office. And I decided to like sabotage that conveyor belt. I was also a very kind of, I guess, a little bit of a naughty teenager, a little
Watch out.
anti-establishment, rebellious, and didn't listen to my teachers, and was a little bit of a dumbass. Somehow it all worked out. So anyway, I was like, okay, I'm gonna quit high school. I'm not gonna stay on this conveyor belt into an office job, and I'm gonna go travel the world and teach windsurfing. And that actually worked out pretty well. So I traveled around, and sometimes I would live and work in like 3 different places a year. And I ended up working a summer season here in this place called Tarifa. And when winter came, I went off to work another season somewhere else. So in the Caribbean, in that case. So European winter, there's nothing happening on the beach. There's no money to be made teaching windsurfing.
That's a life.
So I went to the Caribbean and worked there. And then I came back the next summer to Tarifa. And I just kind of knew like, this is the place that I want to stay here. And I want to stop doing this sort of like traveling around, working in different places every year. As fun as it sounds, after 8 years of just like living out of the backpack, it was kind of like I had enough. So I was trying to figure out like, what can I do where I could make money in the winter that doesn't suck? So as a high school dropout, if I'm not teaching windsurfing, I was mixing cement or doing gardening work or just any sort of manual labor job, painting houses, anything I could do for minimum wage to get some money. So I was like, okay, I've got to do something that's not that. And so I took a course in design, very different from the sort of courses that people take now in design. So this was how to use like Photoshop and Dreamweaver and
like graphic design kind of.
Yeah, but also it was graphic design, but it was also web design. And so web design meant like HTML and CSS and Dreamweaver, but also PHP and MySQL, strangely enough. So, stuff that it wouldn't be anywhere near a design curriculum these days. But, back then, like web design / webmaster just meant somebody asks you for a website and you just do the whole thing, start to finish.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I found myself with a lot of work. So whilst I was still studying, I was telling people, hey, I can make your website. Hey, you need a website? I'll do it, to my friends and to anybody really that I could find. So I did a lot of work while I was studying for free, and then kind of word go around that I could do websites, which at the time I was the only person in my town. So that was pretty neat.
There you go. Yeah.
And so by the time the next summer rolled around and it was time to like open up the school that I was managing, and I was supposed to be buying the school actually, and kind of that was like the path that I was on. And this was just supposed to be a getting through the winter thing. But I had so much work lined up that I'd have to, turn down that work. And I was having a lot of fun, finding it really interesting. And it was more money than I'd ever made before. So I just stuck with it. I was like, you know what? I think I've done this other thing for 8 years. I think it's time for a change in lifestyle. And yeah, that was 2007. And here we are.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've got that similar to me. I've got a background in web development and stuff as well, and it's interesting because I know we've talked, and you mentioned that you do JavaScript, and I don't know, you mentioned a specific library. I can't remember what it was, but it seems like there's a lot of people that have come from web design. At least people of a certain age, from 15 years ago. Anything before 2015 maybe. But when boot camps kind of took over, it seemed a lot of people went the web design route to get into to UX design.
Yeah, I feel like back then there was this kind of gray area so you had like programmers, as they were called back then, not engineers, but
Yeah.
they were doing like the back end stuff. Then you had designers, and then there was like that gray area in the middle where it's like, okay, how do you get the designs to actually, look good? How do you write the code for it? And it wasn't really clear like whose responsibility that was. Sometimes it was the designer, sometimes it was the programmer, but it wasn't like, designers don't write code. And a lot of job postings were for web designers would include turning your designs, like writing the front end code for it. And actually, all my work up until 2019, all the design jobs I did, I wrote code as well.
Yeah, you hear a lot today, about this idea of should designers learn to code. Actually, I haven't heard it that much in the last like couple of years, but that was a thing for a while. And I don't know. I found, for me at least, I found it was helpful, if for no other reason, just communicating what I want to the engineering team, as they go and build all these various things. It made it easier for me, for sure, to have that communication.
For sure. And just designing like realistic things, things that are easy and efficient to turn into code. So sometimes you kind of know, hey, I could modify this design and I can make it look like this, but it doesn't really add that much value. And I know that it's going to add a load of complexity to the code and a lot of like maintainership. So those are like decisions that you can make as a designer whilst you're creating the design. Whereas otherwise you're just left with, oh yeah, this looks a little bit better, but you don't know it's like 10 hours more to code. So you can make those trade-offs, which I think is really helpful. Yeah. Also for me, it was just, it kickstarted my career. It was, I couldn't have really, like the opportunities that I got at the beginning, I wouldn't have got them if I didn't know how to write code. And that speaks a lot to the time period that I started out in.
Absolutely. And that actually kind of ties into the topic that for today. I want to talk about this idea of the tactical up to the strategic over time in your career. And when we talk about that, for those junior designers listening who might not have any idea what we're talking about, what does that look like from your perspective? Your average, junior designer today, starting out, doing a lot of Figma type stuff or whatever design tool they use, and then moving up to the strategic. If you could sort of lay out a generic example of what a UX career may or may not look like, which is, I know, very hard because every company is different. But from your perspective, what do you think that means, going from tactical up to the strategic?
Yeah, as you said, every company is different, and some designers will just accelerate through some areas. Some will be stuck at a certain area for longer, and it could be because of their skills or personality, or it could just be entirely based on the company they work at and how much trust is given to designers. But so I think of that sort of technical skills area, as mentioned before, is a designer that can rapidly create visually appealing designs that follow usability best practices and get them ready for user testing. And that's sort of what I would consider the sort of baseline. You are now a valuable asset in that company. And if there's additional technical skills that you can offer, if it's illustration or copywriting or animation or something like that, that really makes you stand out. And so those are the kind of what I think of as technical skills. I also think of technical skills as writing the script for the user testing or information architecture design. So it's not all just visual design. There are other technical skills which are, let's say you have a task to do, you can go off and you can do that sort of by yourself. But then you move into, I often label it as product thinking. So what I think of there is you're not being given solutions anymore. You're being given problems, and you're expected to help to turn that problem statement into a solution, or into at least like a product spec that you'll then go off and design. So now this problem solving becomes a collaborative process. And as I mentioned before, I think the discovery process is really important for designers to start being seen as a problem solver and not just the person that's executing on somebody else's plan. And a lot of that is down at what kind of questions you ask at the beginning. So when you kick off your design, are you asking what the problem is for the user, and how do we know it's a real problem? Can I dig up some voice of the customer examples? Like, do we have some interview transcripts? Do we have some support chats? Do we have an app review that tells us this is a real problem? Can we quantify this problem? What metric are we measuring to know that we're actually, whether we've succeeded in fixing the problem? Things like that. So if you're asking those kind of questions and digging around for the answers, then you're probably going to grow into a more strategic role over time, because as you look for those answers and you document them and then you share them with the rest of the team, now people are looking at you as not just this person that is generating some output. You're the person that's also sharing a little bit of education and wisdom about a specific area of the app that impacts everybody on the team. So as you start to dig for the answers and then share the answers, that just naturally changes your role and how you're perceived. And then I think the sort of final stage of that is more around vision and influence, where now you're starting to put together all these little pieces and you're starting to see patterns, and you've really been investigating these problems that users have, and you've been able to link them to the business opportunity, or risks of the business. And then you can start to think a little bit broader, and you can start to think, well, actually, if the business opportunity that we're looking for is this, and the recurring user problems are these, then maybe we can start to do more of this, new thing, or we can design these new patterns that will point us towards the future. And so that's a really powerful thing, because then you can use design to innovate and to paint a picture of the future. And then by painting that picture of the future, you get people excited and on board with the direction that you should be heading, and then start to build momentum in that direction, or use your designs to kind of influence thinking. And that, I think, is like the sort of ultimate stage of, let's say you're a principal design, staff designer, whatever it is, lead designer, head of design. So it doesn't have to be like a design manager, but you're somebody that's you've become an expert in that. It could be the entire product, or it could be you're an expert in I don't know, onboarding. It doesn't have to be the entire product, but you understand this onboarding problem so deeply that you can create like a new vision for onboarding in your product that just makes sense and gets people excited and hyped about it. And then you have a lot more influence.
So I'm thinking about this. I'm just thinking in my head, and I throw this out there, get your thoughts on this. But you just said a few things. I just kind of got me thinking. Very early, no experience at all, 0 years of experience. You're given solutions, right?
Yep.
Your job is to take that solution that someone else has already identified and just make it so, right? So we had this thing. I need you to go design this very specific thing. You take that, right? Then over time, you're given problems. And then your job is to figure out what a solution is from a problem that someone else has already identified. Further down the road, you're given, just scenarios. Like this is where we are today. And your job is to figure out what the problem is, and then figure out how to go and ultimately fix it. And so, and then longer term than that, you're thinking even long term, like if we start down this path, this will be the scenario, several years from now, this and kind of creating that vision, as you said. So, I kind of thinking about like I don't know if there's probably more stages than that, but it's kind of just interesting to sort of think about like that tactical piece though. Someone gives you a solution and you can't take that and turn it into a reality. You can't do your job, right? So that goes back to the kind of stuff you're saying about being able to like do your work and actually do that before you can start to think about influencing the rest of the team. I'm also thinking about like, this idea that technical skills are really important early in your career, but they become less and less important as you move up. And what becomes more and more important are some of maybe the soft skills, we might say, like influence and storytelling and, thinking in terms of that, building relationship building, those kinds of things are more critical as you get to that point, because your job is to then explain the things that are in your head to everybody else and get them on board, to get them to want to go along with you. So anyway, that's a really great, primer, I guess, if you will, for this idea of strategic versus tactical. I love that. So you posted something not long ago, and this was something kind of interesting, and I wanted to start the conversation off here. It was a post about how junior designers tend to start off doing the tactical work, and over time are expected to then evolve into doing more strategic type of work. And I'm curious, just from your perspective, there's a lot of stuff that, and I think this is people coming out of boot camps today, they're taught like an end-to-end process, start to finish and everything else. And very rarely, I think you mentioned in this, very rarely are junior designers asked to go create personas, and very, very rarely asked to go create service blueprints and journey maps. It's generally something more senior designers do. As a senior leader, manager, director of UX, having these teams and working with these junior designers, what are some things that you've kind of come across with these junior designers coming out of school that are kind of expecting to do an end-to-end thing, but then they get stuck kind of almost pushing pixels in a way, and they get kind of frustrated and fed up?
So, for example, one thing I've seen with a very junior designer is that they've had all this education in things like personas, that you mentioned, but don't really understand how to use Figma very well. We don't really need like a junior designer to come and make personas for us if we have a UX researcher on the team. Like, that's something that I would prefer the UX researcher to do, because if you look at the personas that are being created in boot camps, it's not really the kind of personas that we would find useful in our day-to-day work. Like, personas are a result of a lot of research data being sort of collated and pulled together to make something that is sort of evidence-based, so that we know that when we design for that persona, we are designing for something real, not just sort of something. I mean, it's not real. It is fictitious, but it's based on a lot of truths, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. Everything that goes into that, it's a very kind of long process, and it's quite complex, and it is better led by a researcher, but it's also a team effort, and it takes a lot of collaboration and coordination with different departments to get all the data and pull the insights from it and create the personas. Oftentimes, a lot of companies just won't do it because it's so time consuming to do it properly, and you're better off at least using real data to design with. And so if you get this sort of junior designer that they've studied persona creation, but they haven't really spent very long using Figma, and what you really want them to do is get something ready for user testing, you find that there's a bad balance of skills that early on in the career, where it's like, hey, we've got some things that have been fully flushed out, and PMs have worked on it, and we know that this is based on the requirements of our users, and there's a business opportunity. We know more or less what we want to build, and we'd love if we have somebody that just can step in and turn this into a design that we can then get tested. And you find sometimes that part of it, they're not super skilled at, because there is so much to learn that in your limited time period to learn these skills, you've just spent like an even amount of time on every single thing. Whereas there are some things that you will learn along the way, and there are some things that I, as a manager, just expect you to have when you join the company. And what I expect people to have is technical skills, like right out the gate, but not so much, strategic, or let's say like visionary, like creating a design vision. You never expect somebody to just come out of boot camp and create a UX vision for the company, but you would expect them to turn an idea into a prototype.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times too, those strategies, those things, they come with wisdom, there's a lot of intuition that goes along with some of those things, and when you're creating strategy, when you're creating long-term plans, you tend to do it based off what you've seen work, what you know would work, what you know won't work, and not necessarily theory a lot of times. And maybe people aren't really learning theory in about that kind of stuff even in boot camps. A lot of them are learning sort of a very linear process. But it's funny you mentioned that, because like a lot of times too, that strategy would greatly depend on the team, the capabilities of the team, and all those things. And so that tends to be people that are higher up, that know what's going on, that see, deep into the various orgs and all that stuff, versus a junior designer who is maybe in a couple of meetings with their manager every week or so. So I don't know, it's kind of fascinating. You said something in our we had a call a couple of weeks back, and you said something I want to touch on a minute, but you can't focus on strategy and communication if you can't do the work yet. And I thought this was like a really fascinating concept. And one of the things I got out of that was, talking about strategy, talking about communication is one thing, but actually being able to deliver, and I want to talk about that. Are you thinking more about like, as a junior designer, I have to build the trust, or is it more as a junior designer, how do I really talk about the work if I can't actually do the work?
Yeah, more the latter. So sometimes a lot of the soft skills that we try and develop as a designer are a little bit like salesy, because you're trying to sell your design to stakeholders, or is being talked about a lot, is trying to demonstrate the value of design. So a lot of it is sort of political, and it's, selling the value of design, selling the value of the specific design you've just done. But, as we know, if you're a salesperson whose product is rubbish, it's only going to go so far. It's like you can try and sell it a few times, but people are going to see through it. So if you are a designer and you do have good technical skills, and the thing that you're producing is decent, and then you develop the soft skills to sell this thing, you're in a lot better position than if you are just jumping straight to, how do I communicate? How do I sell this design? But really the design is rubbish. And something that I think everybody should be studying at junior level is sort of basic usability. So, can you perform like a heuristics on your own design of the main usability key points? So that, for instance, is super important. But, can you create a persona right out the gate? I don't want to bash on personas. People are going to listen to this and say, hey, personas are great. And, they are great sometimes, but you always need usability in your designs. And some companies I've worked at have managed to get away without personas and build successful products. But they haven't done that with designs that are unusable.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting too, because this is something you've posted about quite a bit, is this idea of over time, right? Going from tactical up to strategic. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit and sort of explore that, because I feel like there's a lot of people when they hear strategic, that it doesn't necessarily mean you're not an IC anymore, an individual contributor. It doesn't mean you're managing teams. It's not really going from individual contributor to manager, but it's going from sort of execution up to strategy, less of execution over time, more planning, more thinking. And I want to talk about that a little bit from your perspective. What would be maybe an ideal arc isn't possible to kind of thing, but maybe in your career, talk about your career, maybe going from that sort of tactical to strategic, and how that's kind of evolved and what that might look like for somebody listening who's like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
I'll get around to that, but just to go back to something you said, like there's a post I've done, and it might be this one. You think, it went off big time. The comments, it had like 160 plus comments. I started off with saying designers are being sold a lie. And there was a very influential, I don't know if he's really a designer, or he's a founder of a design focused company, and he has tons of followers. And he wrote a post saying that design has nothing to do with making products look good. And it really pissed me off, because there's this sort of mantra where design is just problem solving, and, making stuff look good. Well, that's kind of just, silly nonsense. And that's got nothing to do with like UX design and product design, that's graphic design. And it just kind of annoys me, because junior designers will be reading that and they'll be thinking, oh, okay, like I really shouldn't take that course in visual design, or, I shouldn't sweat it too much about becoming amazing at using Figma, because really that's not what design is about. And it's like, if you just think that design is only solving problems, the problem with that is you go into this company and everybody above you feels that they're pretty good at that, right? So the PMs feel like they're good at that. The CTOs, like the senior engineers, everybody feels that they're good at problem solving. If they've taken a course in strategy, if you learn about like how to create a strategy, it's kind of like a problem solving process, and it's actually very similar to a design process. So what you'll find is that leaders in all departments feel that problem solving is in their wheelhouse, but what they don't feel is in their wheelhouse is to take this solution to a problem that they might have in their head and turn it into something that looks good and is like a clickable prototype that's ready for user testing. Like that part they can't do. So they might have something in their head, but the ability to turn that into something tangible that is usable, that looks good, is appealing, like that's where they're turning to a designer for. So if junior designers have been given this idea that that's not the value of design, then they're really missing out on this ability to just come into a company, be given an idea, execute on it, turn it around quickly. It's ready for stakeholders to look at and be like, yes, that's it. That's what I was thinking. This is great. Or, oh, actually, I was thinking more about this. Can you tweak this, do that? And the stakeholders they'll see instant value in that. But if you're going into the company as like junior designer with like 3 months experience and you're like, I just want to sit around the table and like talk strategy with you guys, you're in for a bit of a shock. So
well, it's funny. I've said this I've had this conversation with a few other people too. The idea that, designers are the ones solving problems, it's a bit of hubris when you go into these big companies thinking that, but it's also very patronizing to everybody else on the team. I mean, even beyond just the leadership team, engineers are solving problems. The lowly TPM, the product manager, is solving problems. Everybody thinks they're solving problems in a certain way. And I can't remember if it may have been you, may have been somebody else on LinkedIn recently posted about something that design is our job. That part is our job. The visual design is part of our job. Mapping is part of our job, obviously, but that's what we are good at. And that's what other people expect from us. It's not to say that's all we do, but certainly, just like you mentioned, a great example, being able to put together a prototype, being able to look at the designs and do a heuristic evaluation on your own thing to make sure you're actually delivering something that would be useful, even without a persona. All of those things are things that a product manager probably wouldn't do. It's probably not something the CEO could do unless they're a designer. That's the value, especially for junior designers, and being able to go and kind of execute on that stuff, putting together a prototype, all those things. Those are things that you can do that someone else in theory won't. So if I'm hearing you right, one of the things I'm hearing you say is leverage that, right? Then over time, build that trust and those relationships with the rest of the team so that you are brought into those more strategic conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. At the beginning of your career, think about all the things that you can do that people that are not designers can't do. Because over time, as we progress and you're becoming, let's say, a lead designer, staff designer, design manager, what you'll find is those people that have progressed, they've progressed because they have that base of solid technical skills, but then they've got other abilities that are actually very similar to the abilities of the people that have progressed in engineering or in product, or, you know what I mean? Like the skills that have helped them progress are very similar to anybody else that's progressed into like the most senior roles in the company. And then it's more about the soft skills, the communication, the problem solving and stuff like that. But if you want to stand out at that junior level, then you've got to think about the things that are really the design skills that are yours to own. And the same way that an engineer would think about it, like they're not going to go into like their first engineering job and think, well, I'm going to progress really fast because I'm such a great problem solver. They're going to write code that's efficient and doesn't break and isn't full of bugs. And of course, they need to be able to communicate. They need to take feedback well in pull requests and stuff. But I feel like designers seem to be uniquely the ones that are just shooting themselves in the foot by trying to disregard the skills that make them designers.
And maybe this is probably another topic. I'm sure we could talk about this all in its own. But there's design maturity. All these this talk of maturity is always there. We need to see it at the table, and no one takes it seriously and stuff. And when you look at other fields, other groups, product management, engineering, they don't ever seem to have these problems. Yeah. But at the same time, they're not the ones. I feel like often they don't go into conversations assuming they're smarter than everybody else, or like I have all the answers and I'm the one who's here to solve the problems and stuff. And I often wonder, like, are we the ones doing that to ourselves a lot of times because people tend to dismiss that, and they say, well, get out of here. Like, what are you doing? Just go focus on your own stuff. Leave me alone. Let me do my job. And the engineering team, they're not having those problems because they know exactly what they're there for. They're there to write code, and obviously the senior engineers, they have ideas and they have thoughts, but they're not trying to like strong arm everybody else, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more to it, but
I think there's something about design that makes it very problematic. And I know this is a theory I have, is that design usually includes user research as well. And so then the design process straddles a bunch of time points or events in the process of from ideation to release. So there's this talking to users and understanding, their needs and motivation, and that should factor into what we prioritize and what we design. But that often gets handed off to product, and often or product will also be doing the research. So there's this sort of gray area of, does design own research, or are the PMs talking to users? And if design owns research, do they then hand off to a PM? And then the PM decides if this is really what we want to focus on now, because this is the right time, or it's not the right time, or it aligns with the business objectives, or it doesn't. And so there's this kind of like handoff thing, but then it comes back to design when it has been prioritized. So it's sort of unique in that aspect where it's like, we might start it off and then we might not be involved, and then we're involved again, and then we might hand it off to engineers, and then we might be involved again to see if it's actually working and usable. So it's very broken up. And then we have this sort of crisis about how involved we should be from that talking to users to how it gets prioritized and what it looks like. Because then we find that our user research gets turned into a product spec. And so a lot of decisions maybe have been made there about what this thing looks like and what it does and what it is, that we think we should have had more say over. And that's, I think, where design gets really messy when you compare it to engineering, which just feels like a lot tidier and a lot more contained, because as far as they're concerned, it comes like it's collaborative and they have a say in it, but it's definitely like after design and before the users get a hold of it. Whereas design is just like dotted throughout that whole thing, that whole process.
It's way more nebulous. And that sort of, again, goes back to this idea, I think, of being able to focus on the things that you're good at, focus on the things that you can do that somebody else can't. And when it comes to being, a lowly individual contributor designer, this is something I think is really important. And I've actually got, I had that conversation with Tom Griever a couple weeks back about this idea of rigidity and being, just inflexible in your thought process and how you work with your team. And when it comes down to that tactical work, I think a lot, tactical, strategic, it comes, kind of the military, right? You've got like tactics, you've got strategy on the battlefield, and a sergeant is in charge of tactics. They go and like say, go take that hill. And they're going to go take that hill however they need to take the hill. But that's not the sergeant's job to go decide if it's that hill, right? That's like the general. That's somebody else up higher up that's going to say that hill is important because that has strategic value. So sergeant, go take it. And often this is something I see a lot in junior designers is they get sort of upset that they aren't allowed to do the thing, but they're also not even giving the team a chance to go and do the stuff right and then just follow along, right? Like, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to deliver the stuff. You said that's what you need. And when you do that, the latter, you start to build trust, right? And I feel like, to me, this is sort of how you end up getting to that strategic point when you take a back seat, watch the seniors, I guess. Maybe I was going to say the big kids. I don't want to be like this. That was kind of patronizing, but watching, the seniors, the higher level leadership kind of do their thing and you soak it in. And that's how you sort of build that strategic muscle, is watching the other people do it and just saying, yes, I'm here for the team. What do you need me to do? I'm going to go do those usability studies. I'm going to go create a thing. I'm going to go create some wireframes, and watching that and being sort of involved with that. It's not about, I don't think, and I'm curious what your thought is, it's not about being an order taker necessarily. It's not about shutting up and doing as you're told, right? I mean, it's still some sense of having a say, but at the same time, it's not coming in and trying to strong arm everybody to do what you want.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. I think sometimes there is a bit of order taking to be done. If you expect design to be this process where you talk to users and the things that get prioritized are the things that are important to your users, which sounds ideal, but you might end up in a company where not a lot of that's happening, and a lot of the decision on what you're going to end up designing is really just whatever the stakeholder thinks is the right thing to do. So it might be a lot of like intuition based prioritization. And then you might be getting told by a PM how to design, not how to design it, but what to design, what interactions are needed, what screens are needed, what should be displayed on the different pages. And that for somebody that's come from a UX design background where that doesn't really feel like UX design, that can be very frustrating. And I think we're seeing a lot of that playing out on LinkedIn at the moment. You see a lot of posts, people are frustrated by that. And I find that kind of thing quite frustrating as well. But in that situation, I think that the only thing you can fall back on is your craft. So really taking pride in the craft of design, the things that are still left for design to do. And one of those things is visual design. There are other things like information architecture design, generally considered the domain of a UX designer. Hopefully it continues to be usability evaluation, so understanding a sort of heuristics evaluation, things like that. So I think that for designers that find themselves in that situation, you need to really just enjoy doing the work and get good at the craft of that work, whatever it is that you're allowed to do. So maybe the circle of work that you're allowed to do is getting smaller. So then what you can do is, so imagine your like circle is getting smaller of all the possible things you can do. Just make sure that's deeper and deeper as you get better and better at that skill, rather than being frustrated about all the things that you're not able to do. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but that's kind of what I have on my mind about the sort of order taking. It's the way to enjoy it is just to really enjoy doing the work and getting better at the craft. If you're not given the opportunities to do the sort of, let's say, talking to the users or as much ideation as you wish you could.
Yeah. And I think this is where this idea of for me at least, relationships are just so important for us. And it's not just important to get work done. It's important to grow our career. And I think when I'm thinking about this idea of going from tactical to strategic, having regular one-on-ones with your product team, right? If you're, for instance, not given the opportunity to do things like you just mentioned, it's not just shutting up and sitting down. If you actually think this is not the right approach, I should be involved here. Here's how I can help. Having those one-on-ones, those regular one-on-ones, and explaining that. This is how I think I could be valuable. I understand that you need to find the requirements, but I can take this thing and I've learned about user interviews and research and blah, 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 and I could be valuable here. Let's do it together, as opposed to saying it's my job and you're taking it and having this fight. It's like we're collaborating. And so when you start to build that relationship, they start to bring you along. And then you start to get included little by little over time into some of these more what you may call strategic conversations. But even then, maybe it's still just sort of tactical, but you're still building that relationship and you're building the trust.
Exactly.
So that when it comes time for you to be given some opportunity to give your input on some strategic initiative or strategic thing that's happening or something more strategic than just creating some wireframes, they trust you and they know you because you've had these conversations and you're not constantly butting heads. And I feel like for me, I don't know, I see this a lot with junior designers. So principled, it's like I mentioned in the conversation with Tom, so principled, they just butt heads and they just argue and they fight. And you get to the point where like the rest of the team's like, I kind of don't want to work with you anymore. You're kind of a pain in the ass, and those meetings become meetings that they dread. And that's the last thing you want to do if you want to build that career up to get to that point of having more strategic influence. Yeah.
You don't want to be sort of on a crusade to defend the users.
Crusade. That's a great way to say it. Yeah.
And I think product discovery is the easiest area where you can kick this off as a designer. And it's something that I've focused a lot on my writings and have this discovery template that a lot of designers have, well, I don't know if they're all designers, could be lots of different people, but yeah, over 1,000 people have duplicated and started using it, which is
That's
amazing
awesome.
to see. And I really like that because I think it's one of those areas where the junior designers or any designer can start to get involved a little bit more in that sort of more strategic work and not just the order taking. It's also one of those areas that designers tend to enjoy getting involved with, that PMs often own it depending on your company. And PMs that I've worked with, they don't necessarily want to own the whole thing. It's not like, you join a company as a designer, PMs own discovery. You assume that was something that came out of product because PMs wanted to own it. But it might not be the case. Like PMs might be super happy with splitting up the discovery process where there's a set of questions the designer goes off and answers, and a set of questions that the PM goes off and answers, and that you make it into a collaborative process, and then you build better relationships with that PM by the fact that you're now working together on this shared project. And that's kind of my hope with that template is sometimes there'll be designers, I guess, that are working in companies without PMs, or they're on a team without a PM. It's happened to me a lot. And so probably they're taking a little bit more ownership of that process. But by having a FigJam board, it means, and so I mean a FigJam board instead of a document, like a Notion document or whatever, you can make it a little bit more collaborative and you get the whole team involved. And I just find it a little bit easier in that way to turn it into something that everybody can contribute to.
So you talked a lot about, a few minutes ago, you talked about these Figma or FigJam templates that you've been putting together. I want to kind of dig into those and kind of plug them a little bit. But I want to talk about how people can use some of those templates that you've created to be more strategic in planning their own career and planning the things they might need to learn or might need to start thinking about, so that they can eventually get past that sort of technical piece and move up to that more strategic, visionary type of job, if that's what they want to do. But I want to go through some of those. I don't know, you have a couple favorites in mind that you might want to kind of talk through, but I'd love to just sort of go through that, and then we'll link them in the show notes and people can find them there as well. Yeah.
So I think my favorite, it doesn't look very good, so I really should redesign it. It's kind of, it's not very nice to look at, but I think the most accessible, the most valuable one, and the most duplicated one is that discovery template. And I also think it's the most useful one for designers to start on that journey that we talked about of going from, just executing on the work to getting a little bit more involved in problem solving. Yeah, it's these questions that you want to ask at the beginning of a project. So for instance, it's questions like, what's the problem for the user? And there, what we're really looking for is the voice of the customer. So it's not assuming that you know the problem for the user, but you're going out and you're looking for it. Like I mentioned before, the interview transcripts, the snippets of support chat text, something like this. Who has this problem? Who is this user? Is it somebody is it on day one, or is it a power user, or do you have demographics, or is it like somebody on mobile, or whatever that is, that's relevant to the problem. But yeah, it's just a bunch of questions like that. And I think that is really helpful, because even if you're a designer that's not being asked to run the discovery process, you can open up this FigJam, and based on what you've been told by a PM, you can start to fill it in, and then you can start to look for gaps. And then where you have gaps, you can ask the PM you're working with, or you could ask, it could be somebody in finance, so it could be any, there's a question on there. What's the business problem if we don't solve this? Maybe you can talk to somebody from a completely different department about business opportunities and where they see the levers this quarter, and see if you can just learn a little bit more about the business as part of filling out this whiteboard. Questions like, how do we know it's a real problem? Go out, quantify this. If there's some data, are there any funnels set up? If there aren't funnels, maybe you can get some set up. But just the fact that you're going out and asking these questions, it straight away, if these are not things that you've been asking for, it straight away changes how people view you and how people view your role. And so that's kind of my favorite one.
Yeah, I love that one too, because that's something like when we talk about like boot camps, again, every boot camp is different. The way you learn UX is probably different. And if you've got a good mentor at a boot camp, maybe they're helping you talk through some of these. But I've seen a lot of people that have come up through boot camps, or maybe even taught themselves, and they haven't really come across this type of activity before. But it's a really great way to sort of, like you said, get your team to realize that you're thinking about things other than what color should this be? What's the font size? What's the spacing? And all these like just sort of very, very, very specific tactical type of things. and getting to think about that kind of stuff. So I really love that one. That one's awesome.
And mine's very basic. I was on a call with Thomas Wilson recently, and he showed me the equivalent that he uses for his projects, and that was mind blowing. It's completely blows mine out of the water. It's got so much more useful information on there, and I think that serves a different purpose because it's probably not the junior designer just trying to dip their toes in the water kind of template, but for somebody like me to look at what he's using is great and inspirational. But I also, company I work now, I don't think I'd necessarily get buy-in to take enough time to like fill it all in, because people will be like, come on, let's get going. Like,
we gotta move. Yeah.
So yeah, also different templates for different, depending on where you're at in your career, and also what the design maturity is and how long you're given to research things. So another template actually that's pretty neat, I think, is the design review matrix. It's not my idea, but I've done a couple of posts on how to get more useful feedback when you share your work. And I think it's a really neat concept that doesn't necessarily get talked about that often. So I did a couple of posts on LinkedIn about when you share your work, junior sharing their work versus senior sharing their work. And a lot of it is just about context, right? So a typical way to share your work is, hey, I did this thing. Here's the link to the prototype. Tell me what you think. And people are looking at it and they don't really know, like, should I tell you whether I like these colors, or
right, what are you looking for?
Am I checking for typos or like what do you want from me? And also, like, I don't really understand this area of the app that well, so I don't really know what this is supposed to do. So I have this post where I talked about, provide context. Let's say if it's, tell them why this is an important feature, what we're trying to achieve with this, what the goal is of this redesign, et cetera, but also try using a structured approach to feedback. And so I've got this FigJam where it splits feedback into likes, ideas, challenges, and questions. And so that way people have to be a little bit more structured in their approach to giving feedback, so that they're not just like, if I like the color blue, you can put the post-it on that area. That's great. But if you have an idea of something you could try, then you can put it in the idea section. And challenges, I think, is a great way to phrase stuff that is like, I don't like this, but maybe you can say like why this is a challenge. The fact that you'd only used an icon and not icon plus label seems like it could be a challenge for the user to find it, or something like that. And then questions of like, I just don't understand this thing. So I think sharing a FigJam where people could just like drop stickies in a different area of the FigJam is a lot more inviting to give feedback, and it's a lot more structured. And then the other thing on that post, so I know this is not about the templates anymore, but about giving feedback, is telling people where you're at. Like, is this
right,
like ready to ship? In which case, you probably don't want like entirely new approaches to this.
Yeah. Have you thought about completely redoing the whole thing?
Yeah.
Like the engineering team's ready for. Yeah. So I think this is something, and I don't know how this is not part of a curriculum, but I have seen so many bootcamp curriculums that have never touched on design critique.
Yep.
And it blows my mind. We very rarely teach people, and this is a skill. Critiques are a skill. Being able to facilitate a critique, to me, is a skill that many, many, many people have not learned unless you had a really great team who did critiques in a really great way. And I actually just talked with Justin Dower recently about this. And this is something like, I feel this is something so important to get feedback and understand how to get feedback, because when you get feedback and it's bad feedback, that could like completely derail the entire product or project, or it could send you off in a completely wrong direction simply because you didn't, one, understand how to ask for feedback in the right way, and two, what to do with that feedback when you got it. Because just because you get feedback doesn't mean you have to go and like make that change immediately. There's a book that I recommend everybody read called Discussing Design. It's an O'Reilly book.
Oh, cool. I haven't heard of that.
And it's great. And I actually was just looking for my bookshelf. I must have brought it somewhere else. It's not in here. I can't remember the authors off the top of my head, but it is a fantastic book. And it's all about setting up critiques and how to do critiques the right way and tips and tricks and all that stuff. Pitfalls to avoid doing critiques. It's so important. But I love your FigJam template because it also can allow you to do it like asynchronously as well.
Yeah.
Because doing this, it's hard getting everybody in a meeting, especially if you're remote, you're in different time zones, all that stuff. But anyway, I love the template, but these are awesome, man.
Doing it remote, that's one of the things that I mentioned in the post actually is if you get on a call and you show somebody design and you expect to get good feedback, that's just not going to happen. Like
right. Immediately. Like right now, give it to me now.
Most people, I mean, some people can do it, but if it's a sort of like a complex design, and you're just walking them through the prototype and asking for real, like insightful, constructive feedback, the wrong way to do it. Like for me personally, I can give you some feedback, but it's just going to be the like surface level obvious stuff. But if you give me the link with a bunch of context in a Slack post or something, and then I can go away and I can take a look at this myself, and I can give you some feedback asynchronous, then we can meet up and we can use a synchronous time for the designer to ask me questions about my feedback. And now we're having a conversation about the feedback, but we've covered all this ground asynchronously in our own time. And I feel like that's just a much better use of time. And it's interesting what you said, like boot camps are not teaching feedback or design critique. And that is such a fundamental skill that is really fundamental throughout your career from the beginning to the end. And as you progress in your career, then giving feedback becomes a little bit more critical than how to receive feedback. But even still, like giving and receiving feedback are pretty fundamental skills because I would expect junior designers or designers of all levels to be in a design critique meeting and participating. So I would say that giving and receiving feedback would be more a fundamental skill. I don't want to keep bashing personas, but to go back to personas. And the reason I bash personas is because every single design case study that has ever landed in my inbox for a job role has had, has had personas in it, every single one. Whereas I've hardly ever expected a designer to create a persona. And whereas I have expected every single designer I've ever worked with to request feedback and to provide feedback on a weekly basis, pretty much. And like giving feedback, there's a whole art to that as well. And I just did a recent post about that, about how to think about giving feedback. And I think that's not something that we take seriously enough as designers.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Speaking of persona, I have this funny anecdote. I was talking to somebody recently who created 3 personas after talking to 4 people. I was like, what are you doing, man? Come on, get out of here.
Yeah. Should have just made it 4.
Why? Just like, so you just like basically took the 4 interviews and you just compiled them into a persona. Anyway, that's really funny. But the feedback, it's just so important. And I feel like, again, it's one of those things, especially like what you're talking about with the asynchronous thing, enterprise software, for instance, can get very complex and very specific business problems and business processes that you're designing for. And if you go ask someone for a feedback that has no idea what that business process is, you're going to have a very hard time getting accurate and actionable feedback, valuable feedback even. So being able to send that over and having somebody do it asynchronously gives them time to go kind of like look through, maybe there's documentation about a business process, documentation about personas who might be using this thing, and allowing them time to go do that without having to have it on the spot. And I also think too, I've been reviewing a lot of these like kind of cognitive biases and stuff. And there's people that are in meetings that just won't want to give negative feedback in person because they just don't feel like they want to hurt your feelings and everything else. And doing it asynchronously, you're probably going to get, I think, way more honest feedback than if you tried to get somebody on the spot in front of a lot of people that might not want to embarrass you, might not want to hurt your feelings or whatever. But if you can do it remotely like that, I don't know. That's a really powerful way to do it. I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because sometimes on the spot, you're a little bit worried about just blurting something out without having sort of thought about it. Whereas asynchronous can be a little bit more measured. And maybe, you've got something subjective in your brain and then you can kind of think, okay, well, how do I turn that into something a little bit more objective? And no, that's a great point.
we've been talking for a little bit. I got some questions I want to ask to get our listeners out there to get to know you a little bit better. But before we do that, any closing advice, any closing parting advice for some of those junior designers who might feel like they're sort of stuck on that tactical route, want to get thinking about more strategic? What is some advice that you might have?
I think that, the main advice for that I have is just keep asking questions about why we're doing this thing, and don't feel that you're being annoying or standing in the way by asking those questions. Why are we doing this? What's the problem for the user? How do we know that it's a problem for the user? Why are we doing this for the business? Who cares about this metric? What is this metric? Who cares about it? Who owns it? How are we going to know if we succeed? Like, you just got to keep asking loads and loads of questions. Be really curious about all the reasons why you're doing the work that you're doing.
I love it. Awesome, man. Cool. Well, let's hop into these questions. You got a few minutes to stick around?
Yeah, I got time. Let's do it.
All right. Awesome, man. Cool. So first up, these are just 5 quick questions, super easy. First thing that comes to the top of your head, what is your favorite non-design book?
Yeah, non-design book. I read a lot. I think one of my favorite non-design books would be Einstein's Greatest Mistake.
What's that about?
It's about Albert Einstein, and what I really love about it is it explains some of the crazy theories that he came up with, well, crazy and true and wonderful theories, in a way that people with absolutely no idea about physics and math can understand it. So it's really mind-blowing, because it's like, oh, wow, I actually understand how speed affects time and stuff like that. So it's kind of like just brain-melting stuff that is explained so simply, and also with like little illustrations. Yeah, that's kind of really like a mind-melting book that made me think a lot. It was great.
That's awesome, man. So what is his greatest mistake? No spoilers, but.
So his greatest mistake, it's basically about rejecting quantum physics.
Oh, wow. Oh, did he reject quantum physics? I didn't know that. I don't think I realized that.
So he the whole like Schrodinger's cat stuff, he was basically rejected that, and so didn't participate in like that new wave of physics.
Oh, wow. Okay. I don't think I realized that at all. That's fascinating. I love that kind of stuff, man. That's right up my alley. I'm putting it on my list. I wrote it down.
Cool.
All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
I really like Making Sense podcast.
Making Sense. What is that?
Making Sense. It's a Sam Harris podcast, although it kind of went off the deep end politically when during the Trump era. So I really enjoyed it. And then it was all just about bashing Trump, which I have no problem with people bashing Trump. It's just, if you don't live in the States, after a while, you're just like, can we get back to like the whole like thought-provoking stuff?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of my favorites. Now it's got, since the change in president, it's gone back to more sort of thought-provoking
well, watch out, man.
stuff.
I don't know. Elections are coming up. You never know.
Yeah.
America may just vote that son of a bitch back in the office. We'll see.
Yeah.
I might end up moving to Europe if that's the case, but we'll see. Maybe you could sponsor me or something. All right. What is your favorite meal?
Oh, this is difficult because I love food so much. Like, I love going out to eat, and I also love cooking, and I'm pretty obsessed with food, and I have so many favorite meals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if there's just one thing I could eat for the rest of my life, it'd probably be pasta.
Oh, okay. Any particular kind?
It would probably be puttanesca.
Ooh,
So it's,
all right.
you're familiar with that, with anchovies and capers and a lot of garlic. But I also am crazy about Mexican food and Indian food and Thai food. And these are things I also really enjoy cooking.
Right on. Do you guys get a lot of Mexican food in Europe? I imagine it's
not a lot.
Probably not.
Not a
Yeah.
lot. But I love cooking tacos.
Oh, man.
So much so that my family had to like ban me from making tacos. That's like, no, stop. That's enough. No more
That's
tacos.
hilarious. I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's one of the beautiful things about living here is there's a ton of Mexican. I was actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma for work a couple weeks back, and we're like, where should we go eat? And we looked at like around the hotel we were staying, and there was literally like, I think like 15 taquerias.
Wow. Yeah, I'm jealous.
It was like, pick, just pick one. Well, and I'm sure any of them are good. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot? You're over there in Europe. You can go anywhere you want. Pretty amazing stuff around you.
Yeah, I'll have to give. So I'm very spoiled. I live on one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. So where I live is a vacation spot.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Every
But
day's a vacation.
we're pretty bad at like taking proper vacations. We always end up just visiting family. But last year, around about this time, we went to Kenya, the whole family, and that was just absolutely amazing. I actually grew up in Africa, and
Oh, really? Okay.
we lived in Kenya for a short time when I was a kid, and so we went to Kenya, and we went on safari, and we saw loads of animals because my daughters are obsessed with animals, totally obsessed, and like their favorite thing to do is horse riding, and their favorite. We have a dog and 3 guinea pigs, and they just want more and more animals. And so that was amazing. And then we went to a place called Diani Beach on the coast, and it's beautiful, like white sand beach. And so
that's
that
awesome,
was definitely the best vacation I've had.
That sounds like it. That's awesome. So I actually meant to ask you this earlier. I have like such a hard time placing your accent. Where are you from? You mentioned growing up. You mentioned living in Africa. Are you from the UK? Yep. Or where is that accent coming from? I can't place it.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult question for me when people say, where are you from? Because I was born in Africa. I lived in Africa till I was 16, dropped out of school, taught windsurfing, traveled around the world, ended up in Spain. My parents are both English. I've never lived there. I have a UK passport, and I've spent most of my life in Spain, but the first 16 years in Africa. So yeah.
Wow. What part of Africa?
It's a whole mix.
Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Sudan. Then we moved to Ethiopia, then Kenya, then Botswana, then Egypt. And then I left and went off and did my own thing and traveled around.
Wow. Were your parents like diplomats or oil and gas? It's either one of those two.
No, neither. So my father worked for Oxfam in Sudan and Ethiopia during the famine, like the...
Yeah.
You probably, like me, I think we're a similar age, so you're probably just about old enough to remember Live Aid and the famine in Sudan and Ethiopia. Yeah. So he was camps manager, so refugee camp manager for Oxfam in Sudan and Ethiopia. And then he became, then he went more he went from humanitarian policy to conservation policy, and that's what he did in the other countries.
Wow, dude, that's fascinating. Wow, that's a really interesting backstory, man. That's pretty damn cool. Yeah, like as a designer, everybody's always talking about like having these experiences and help you, inspiration for design and all that stuff. You can't beat that as far as experiences, man. That definitely beats like backpacking trip in Europe for a summer, I love it. That's pretty badass.
Yeah. Then I went and just traveled around after leaving home at 16, I went and traveled around to a ton of countries as well. I'm paying my own way. I will say that the downside of that was I went to, I think, 7 different schools as a kid. So that could have contributed to me dropping out of school early.
I love it, man. Nah, that's cool. That's so fascinating, man. You could write a book. I bet you could write a memoir. I'd read that memoir. All right. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Oh gosh, so the one that I use the most to do design that's not Figma is probably just Notion. But
I love Notion, man.
But that's not really a design tool. So I would say my iPad and Apple Pencil.
Right on. You a lot of sketching? Do you draw?
I do like sketching, but I'm not. I don't create anything that is worth sharing. I'm not like a talented artist, but I do enjoy like getting some sketches out. If you're really feeling stuck, I think there's something about pen and paper, or in this case, like iPad and Apple Pencil.
Digital pen and paper, yeah.
Yeah, digital pen and paper.
Right on, man. That's awesome. All right, Dan, well, that is it, man. Before we get out of here today, why don't you tell everybody listening out there where they can find you, website, LinkedIn, all that stuff, and give yourself a plug.
Yeah, sure. So my LinkedIn, Dan Weiner, should be easy to find. Usually find me posting 2 or 3 times a week, although I have absolutely no schedule, so I can't promise anything. I'm also putting together a design career guide. I hope it'll be a website with like a lot of growing assets and information on the website, but probably I'll start off with a PDF, just a lot easier. So at designcareer.guide, there's a wait list to sign up to be notified when it's ready. And yeah, that's really the main two places.
Cool. And we will link all of that in the show notes. So check it out at beyonduxdesign.com if you're interested in getting any of those links. Along with send me your the whichever templates you want to put, and we'll put those in the show notes as well. So go check those out. Everybody listening, find Dan, learn some stuff.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Dan and me for today. I hope we helped shed a little bit of light on this idea of tactical to strategic work and evolving your career over time. Remember that you don't have to start your career out just laser focused on strategy. But remember that it's important to think about this long term and evolve over time to doing less and less of that tactical work, if that's what you want to do, and eventually get to that high level strategic thinking, visionary thinking. And I'm curious, have you experienced any of this in your career? Have you had trouble transitioning from that tactical work to that strategic work? And if so, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download the New Rules of Work, the modern playbook for navigating your career by Alexandra Kavoulikos and Catherine Minshew. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial, cancel at any time, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with Audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation. You can cancel anytime, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Figma and use the promo code BeyondUX at checkout to get $100 off any of Figma Academy's courses. Join over 4,000 designers from industry leaders like Shopify, Microsoft, and Amazon that have already signed up. So kickstart your Figma mastery journey today. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. So I have got my good buddy, Dan. You know what, Dan? I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is it Wiener, Weiner? How do you pronounce it?
It's not Wiener, unless you want to be mean.
Oh, well. That's what happens when you have like a full-time job plus all this crap.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it.
I had lots of arguments with my wife. Don't tell her that.